Good afternoon, everybody. Buenas tardes a todos. Welcome to the October 2023 AB 617 Portside Community Steering Committee meeting. Bienvenidos a la reunión del Comité Directivo AB 617 de octubre 2023. At this moment, we'll give it a few moments for folks to join. In the meantime, I'll hand the mic over to our wonderful interpreter, Vicky, who will give instructions on how to access interpretation.
Okay, the interpreter is going to give the instructions first in Spanish and then in English. Buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Para acceder a la interpretación simultánea al español, si están utilizando una computadora portátil o de escritorio, favor de localizar el icono con figura del mundo en la parte inferior de su pantalla cuando este aparezca en un minuto y luego pulsen en interpretación de lenguaje, dice en inglés Language Interpretation, y seleccionen el idioma español. Si están conectándose desde su teléfono, iPad o dispositivo similar, busquen el menú con los 3 puntitos en la esquina superior del lado derecho de su pantalla y pulsen interpretación de lenguaje y luego español. Esto permite que escuchen la traducción al español con un 80% de volumen y el audio en inglés se escuchará al fondo con un 20% de volumen. Tienen la opción de apagar el audio en inglés pulsando Mute Original Audio, ubicado en el mismo menú donde eligieron el idioma español. Gracias. This afternoon, if you're joining us and you are using a laptop or a desktop computer, please look for the icon of the globe at the bottom of your screen when this appears in a moment, and click on interpretation, language interpretation. And if you do not understand Spanish fully bilingually, you should choose the English channel so that you can hear anything that is spoken in Spanish into English on that channel. If you are connecting from a telephone, iPad, or similar device, please look for the menu at the top right of your screen with the 3 little dots, and click on there, look for language interpretation, and then also there you will select English as your channel. Thank you so very much. And this concludes the interpretation channel instructions, and we will wait for the channels to be activated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicky. The interpretation channels are now open. If someone can give me a thumbs up in the Spanish channel just to confirm that the interpretation is coming through correctly. Ana, can you confirm that the Spanish channel is working?
Montserrat gave you a thumbs up.
Escucha.
Yes, I can confirm.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Great. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today for the Portside Community Steering Committee meeting. We have a packed agenda today, so I'll hand it over to my colleague Ana to walk through our meeting objectives and the agenda.
Great, thanks, Chewy, and good evening, everyone. So for today's meeting objectives, we will be receiving an update as well as a chance to provide feedback on the San Diego Association of Governments, SANDAG, on their draft regional medium duty and heavy duty zero emission vehicle blueprint. We will also be learning about the Port of San Diego's and Environmental Health Coalition's small truck fleet outreach efforts. And lastly, we will be discussing the initial concepts as well as an opportunity for feedback regarding a potential memorandum of understanding between the San Diego County Air Pollution Control District and the Port of San Diego for the indirect source emissions. So we can go to the next slide. And so for today's agenda, we'll be starting off with roll call and general updates, and then moving along to the approval of last meeting's notes as well as tonight's agenda. We will then have an update and discussion on the draft regional medium duty as well as the heavy duty zero emission vehicle blueprint, followed by a presentation from the Port of San Diego and EHC on the small truck fleet outreach report. And then we will be closing with the presentation and discussion from the Air District and the Port of San Diego on the initial concepts on the potential Port and Air District MOU for indirect source emissions. And then closing the meeting out with public comments and closing remarks. So as a reminder, before we begin our meeting, these are our meeting agreements. So remember to create space for everyone to contribute. Step up if you haven't had a chance to speak. Step back if you've had opportunities to speak multiple times. Ensuring that only one person speaks at a time. That we listen to each other as well as respect each other's opinions, knowledge, and perspective. And be cautious of time. And then lastly, just a reminder for everyone to speak at a decent pace and clearly for our interpreters. So with that, we'll go ahead and move to roll call. Okay. So to start off, is Keith here? Keith Corey? Okay. Is Shelby here? Shelby. Jack?
Good evening, I'm here.
Good evening, thank you. Is Massey here as well?
She won't be here.
Got it, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you. Lydia? I see you.
Here, thank you.
Thank you. Leslie?
Good evening, present.
Good evening, thank you. Phil?
I'm here.
Phil, thank you. Tim?
Here. Mariella is not here.
Got it, thank you. Nick?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. Joy?
Good evening, I'm here.
Thank you. Martin? Martin Reeder? We're not seeing Martin. David? David. Roman? Dr. Stephanie Yun?
Hi, I'm here.
Hi, thank you. Jose Marquez? Diane?
I'm here.
Thank you, Diane. Samantha?
Good evening, I'm present.
Thank you. Is Sergio here as well?
Yes, I'm here. Good evening.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good evening. Dinah?
I'm here present. Liana is not.
Okay, thank you. Filomena? Janice?
Here.
Thank you, Janice. John?
I'm here.
Hi, John. Thank you. Hillary? Alicia?
Presente, aquí estoy.
Gracias, Alicia. Margarita?
Presente. Buenas tardes.
Gracias. Gracias, buenas tardes. Noemi? Vanessa?
Vanessa's here.
Thank you. Salvador?
Salvador's here.
Okay. Montserrat?
Presente.
Gracias. Sylvia?
Present.
Thank you. Ashley?
Present.
Thank you. Josephine?
I'm here.
Thank you. And Maritza?
Here.
Thank you. All right, so with that, looks like we meet quorums for today's meeting. And I'll pass it back to Chuy.
Great, thank you everybody for your participation and attendance today. Good to see a almost full house. One general update that I forgot to share at the top of the meeting, we do have a new primary representative from the Port of San Diego, so wanted to give Leslie Nishihira a warm welcome to the committee, and thank you for joining us. And Phil Gibbons will continue as the alternate representative from the Port of San Diego. At this time, I'd like to hand over the mic to Kathy Keehan, who wanted to give a quick update and follow-up from last month's presentation.
Thank you, Chuy. I just wanted to take a minute. I appreciated the conversation we had last meeting about using some of the Community Air Protection Program incentive funding to fund school buses around the county in low-income communities. We heard some feedback after the meeting that you all wanted to hear some more information about those other communities, what their air quality issues were, and what those projects would look, where those projects would be, and what they would look like. So I just wanted to let you all know we're working on that, and we hope to come to one of the next couple of meetings to do a very brief presentation on some of that information, so you all have it for the future. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you so much for your retention and participation last month on that question.
Great, thank you, Kathy. I'm looking forward to seeing that follow-up presentation. I didn't receive any other requests for general updates from the partner agencies, so I'll go ahead and move us forward to our first formal agenda item, which is the approval of last month's meeting notes and tonight's agenda. I want to open it up to the floor to see if there's a motion and a second.
This is Maritza. I motion to approve the minutes.
This is Tim Sandag. I second.
Sorry, and agenda. Sorry.
Thanks, Maritza. Tim, do you also?
Yes, I second the meeting notes and agenda.
Perfect. Is there anyone opposed to the motion on the floor? Yes, Jack?
Hi, not opposed at all. Just wanted to follow up on the one item, Roman numeral 4, subparagraph A. David Soderman mentioned that the Air District could work with CARB to bring another assessment for the Portside community. But really, that was in response to my question about breaking down the sources of black carbon and diesel particulate matter. I just wondered if that was ongoing, or if we were going to hear anything about that tonight, or just wondering what the progress on that particular item was.
Thanks, Jack. David Soderman's on the line. Maybe you can quickly answer that question.
Yeah, hi, Jack. No, we're not going to be giving an update today, but I'll definitely work with CARB on that to bring some of that information back online to answer that question fully.
Thanks, David. That'd be great. And there was somebody from CARB. It was a lady who was making some comments during when we were discussing this, and I never did see or get her name because she offered to follow up on some of the observations and reports that CARB was providing in terms of their sampling and limitations and all that. Do you happen to know who that was?
I don't remember what that is, but we can reach out to our CARB contacts and figure out who was making that comment.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Liliana Nunez. I'm not sure if I made if that was in regards to the cancer risk assessment, or was it about our emissions inventory? But either way, I can work with the district to get some time on the agenda to get, some updates. If not, email would also work.
Thanks, Liliana. That'd be great.
Sure.
Sylvia's hand is raised.
Chewy, this is Sylvia. Just a minor correction to the agenda. My last name is with an A at the last of my name. It says Calzado, but it should be with an A. Just a minor thing, but
Is that in the notes? Sorry.
under my name, Sylvia Calzada.
In the
You
notes
posted
or
under-
the?
Yes, the meeting notes.
Okay, thank you. We'll make sure to make that correction.
Thank you.
Apologies for that. Great. It sounds like aside from that minor correction, I think we can move forward with the approval of the notes and the agenda. Thank you, everybody. Moving on to the next agenda item. I'd like to hand over the mic over to Natasha Dulik from Sandag and Diane from EHC, who will give a presentation on the zero emission vehicle blueprint. Natasha?
Can you hear me? Sorry, I was having some issues with my computer.
I can hear you now, yes.
Is Diane on here? I don't see her. She was going to be kicking off the meeting, so.
Oh, sorry, I see that she's in the attendee list.
Okay.
I've just asked her to join as a panelist. Hi, Diane.
Sorry, I probably clicked on the wrong link. So
No worries. We're good to
okay. Go. All right. So hi Natasha, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. We're here. Thank you so much. And Chewy and Joanna, thank you for providing the time for us to present today. Environmental Health Coalition has been really pleased to partner with Sandag and the Port of San Diego to develop a regional plan for medium and heavy duty charging for vehicles. And we think this is super important because charging has been identified, as you'll hear in a second report that we're going to be giving tonight. Charging has been identified as one of the big challenges for truckers and for truck fleets to be able to transition to zero emission. So I think Sandag has taken on this important task that will help us to identify how many charging stations we're going to need to site throughout the county, and hopefully we're going to get to where they should be. We know that we will need to have some of these charging stations in Portside, but there's a need throughout the county, and I think Natasha will be talking about that. So if we could go to the next slide, please. As I said, EHC has been working with Sandag, who's been leading this project, and they've contracted with ICF, who's done a lot of the information gathering and data compilation. And I think you'll see when we get to those slides that it's giving us a really good idea of the kinds of charging infrastructure that we're going to need in San Diego. Next slide, please. And we know that the SERP has been ahead of its time, really, to call for the establishment of, we're actually moving forward faster than the state law requires for transition to zero emission trucks and medium duty trucks as well as heavy duty trucks. But what's also called out in the SERP is creating this infrastructure in Portside with sites that will be operational by 2026. And so I think it's really in keeping with the SERP that the Sandag report has been completed. Can we have the next slide, please? So just to remind you all, in California, we're looking at 100% zero emission sales by 2035. And drayage trucks, those are the trucks that serve the ports, have to be fully transitioned to zero emission by 2035. So, and the ports, Maritime Clean Air Strategy and the SERP call for the transition by 2030. So we have a lot to do in a short period of time. And so I think this plan is going to really help us to get there. Next slide, please. And these big trucks, the ones that you see here, the class 7s and 8s, the big trucks are the ones that have the highest emissions, particularly of nitrates of oxygen. So that's a contributor to smog. It can exacerbate asthma and San Diego, if we can go to the next slide, is out of compliance or is in non-attainment for both ozone and NOx. So we have work to do that is required by the state and the federal government as well. So next slide, please. And then lastly, just to say, there are huge benefits that will come from the implementation of the Advanced Clean Fleets rule, and that's the statewide rule. And the work that we're doing through the SERP and through the MCAS and now through the Sandag plan are really going to help us to reduce pollutants like NOx and particulate matter, as it shows here. And that leads to fewer cardiopulmonary deaths, fewer hospital admissions for cardiovascular and respiratory illness, a reduction in asthma hospitalizations, as well as greenhouse gas emission reductions. And it has a direct benefit because in the total cost of ownership and operation for zero emission vehicles is quite a bit less expensive when you look at it in total over a period of time than it is to run diesel. And certainly the health benefits and how those translate to dollars is much less. So next slide, please. And I think here, Natasha, is where I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Diane. My name is Natasha Dulick, and I'm a part of the Blueprint project team at Sandag. Excited to be here with you all today to discuss the project a little more. We are still in the draft stages of the Blueprint report, so very much open to feedback and comments from you all today. And I just want to quickly just provide the Blueprint is broken into 3 major key deliverables and then our final report. So we have our needs assessment, our siting criteria, and then our near and long-term implementation strategies. And all 3 of those reports are going to be wrapped up and kind of summarized into a final Blueprint report that's a bit more digestible. So back to my slides here. I'm going to be going through a few slides that represent some data that were a result of our needs assessment report. With this first one here is a glimpse at what the region is going to be looking like by 2040. So by 2040, San Diego fleets will be made up of around 70,000 medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles. And you can see that this pink section here is the expected battery electric vehicles. And then there's this kind of skinny green line that's looking at the hydrogen portion of vehicles. And then the remainder will be diesel and gasoline and expected to transition over the next 10 years or so. Next slide, please. So within our report, we looked at depot charging, which is private or on-site charging, kind of like the home base of where people will be, and then as well as on-route charging, which would be that public charging. And then if you could go to the next slide, here's where we break it down. So looking at public and private charging or that depot charging stations that'll be needed to support the influx of vehicles, those 70,000 zero emission trucks and buses. So by 2040, we're looking at needing about 23,000 chargers, with the majority of these being at those depot or private charging stations, and then 3,200 of these being public charging stations. Next slide, please. If you could just hit it again, there's a graph. Perfect. A few more times, probably. Thank you. Okay, so in regards to hydrogen, this slide here is showing the hydrogen stations that will be needed based on our needs assessment, estimating to have about 83 hydrogen fueling stations. And this is based on being able to provide 65,000 kilograms of hydrogen per day to power these vehicles. And this could change depending on what the future of hydrogen looks like in the coming years. And between hydrogen and charging, we do understand that charging is going to be much more in demand. And within our final blueprint report, we're going to have a better comparison of the two, so you can kind of see what they'll both be looking at in 2040. Next slide, please. Okay, so those are some quick key numbers that we had from our needs assessment. And now I'm going to be going over a brief overview of our siting criteria report, which we developed for placing charging and fueling infrastructure in the region. And this was something that we had brought to you all back in May, the last time we were at your meeting, and we incorporated your feedback. That was super great and helpful, so thank you for that. I just want to do a quick recap of what we provided in the siting criteria. So we have 5 key categories in the report. The first one is utilization. So that's really looking at vehicle volume at a site and dwelling time, how long our truck's going to be there, just to see what that high utilization rate is, and make sure that we're not adding to areas where trucks aren't already seen. We don't need new stations if they're not necessary. And then land use is another criteria, and this is looking at parking spaces, the land space itself, how much land is needed for a site, access and congestion concerns, as well as safety. And then the third one here is equity, and this one's highlighted. This is a main component of this specific report and the whole blueprint report, considered throughout the entire report. And we look at the proximity to disadvantaged communities when placing infrastructure and prioritizing placing infrastructure nearby or outside the communities to avoid trucks having to travel through the communities. But for those stations that are within communities, considering the benefits to the disadvantaged communities when we are directly replacing those truck emissions with zero emission vehicles. So that will have beneficial impacts to those communities. And then we have grid capacity, and this is where we're just looking at the current grid and what scalability looks like, how many charging stations could be added to a site, or solar options, things like that. And then last but not least, we have environmental, and this is where we consider environmental requirements when it comes to siting infrastructure, things like flood risk at a land or a piece of land, and then thinking of things like hydrogen safety. So if hydrogen is being produced nearby or on site, making sure to consider safety and co-concerns for clean hydrogen production only. And this was considered and further discussed in our implementation strategies report. Next slide, please. So this slide shows where the region's warehouses are at and provides an idea of where these chargers might be going. It doesn't mean that every single dot here will have chargers, but just an idea of where to potentially properly locate these charging infrastructure sites. I'll go through quickly. So next slide, please. And then how can SANDAG and other public agencies help? This is really where our implementation strategies report comes in. This is the third and most recent report that we have done for this project. And it's where we sought to address adoption barriers that we've heard from everyone, and develop some strategies and actions that can be taken to help with the transition to zero emission vehicles. So you can see here we have a number of areas that we addressed. I'll summarize them kind of into 5 key main categories. First and foremost, we have incentive programs. This was a big one that we heard, the number one thing that we heard, being able to provide funding and financial incentives. We know that the upfront cost of these vehicles is high, so we want to support programs that can help reduce this cost. And prioritize programs for low and moderate income communities. How can we get vehicles into these communities faster? And then we have utility coordination and permit streamlining. And the real focus there is to make sure that when we are talking about streamlining, we're not compromising on safety. And then public-private partnerships. The idea here is really to get things in the ground faster. So we're going to need to work together to do so. And then policy and regulations was a section of our strategies. This talks about prioritizing consistency with policies across county lines and international border, and being able to support things like the emphasis for clean hydrogen production, looking at weight exceptions, things like that. And then last but not least, strategies that address workforce training and outreach and launch education and awareness programs and campaigns. So SANDAG is looking to support the creation of more of these programs and partnering with other jurisdictions to provide demonstrations and programs that allow people to better understand these vehicles and the technology with these infrastructure developments. And then of course, share out our resources with our stakeholders and key partners. So those are our strategies at a super high level. These are all based on the feedback that we've received, and we do go into a lot more detail in our reports. I'm going to add into the chat the link for our project website that has all of the individual reports right after I finish talking. And just want to add too that Diane's about to facilitate some questions and discussion, but we will be sending our draft report out within the next coming weeks for written comments and feedback. So stay tuned for that. I'll pass it back to Diane now.
Thanks, Natasha. And then if we could move to the last slide. We wanted to really make sure that the CSC, all of you have the opportunity to ask questions. We know that that was a very high level report, and we're trying to capture the main messages associated with the report in a short period of time. But thanks, Natasha, for sending out the full report or the link for the full report. So when it comes out, maybe we can make sure that everybody here gets that notification so that they can review the report and send comments. But based on what we've said tonight and what we've given you some information about, we kind of came up with these 3 questions to make sure that you are satisfied that the blueprint appropriately addresses key economic, social, environmental, and community impact factors. And we know that you're thinking seriously and very often about the Portside communities and how this report and this plan will impact those communities. What else can SANDAG, any other agencies, and we should mention, I hope we mentioned that the Port of San Diego has been a really important partner in this effort. And they're here tonight, so it'll be good for them to be able to weigh in as well. And what else can SANDAG do to support equity while we're working to accelerate truck and bus electrification? So those are the kinds of questions. You can ask any question you like and give any feedback. And so I think we're ready for that. So I saw that Jack had his hand up, and then I just saw Janice put her hand up.
Thanks, Diane and Natasha, for that report. Question for Natasha. You had that slide showing all of the warehouse locations around San Diego County, and I'm wondering if SANDAG has data regarding the quantity of truck traffic that is associated with either specific warehouse locations or even clusters of warehouse locations. And the reason I'm asking the question is it would be extremely helpful as the Air District considers an ISR, and part of the missing link here in our discussions has been how much diesel truck traffic is actually associated with different warehouses around San Diego County. We're not sure anybody has any idea. I'm wondering if you did.
Sure, great question. We do not, from what I know. Diane had actually included the slide, which was super great and helpful, about the warehouse locations. Something that we're definitely looking into and hopefully moving forward with is being able, like when thinking of citing these locations and providing some maybe specific locations in the future, is being able to get information like that. So yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Sorry, I can't be more helpful.
No, that's okay. That was the what I was wondering, and then I would follow up and say that would be one of the ways I think SANDAG could really help with the whole advancement towards electrification is to understand exactly what parts of the county are affected by a lot of diesel truck traffic and to what extent.
Sure, yeah.
Well,
Oh, go ahead, Diane.
Sorry, Natasha. I will say, one, let's give credit to the Air Pollution Control District. That's their map that they put together to identify where the warehouses are in San Diego. So it gives us an idea. We know that heavy duty trucks serve these warehouses, so we know that they are there. We also know that the larger the warehouse, the more trucks there are. And that's been evidenced by the South Coast ISR and direct source rule that they've put forward, as well as work that CARB has done. And CARB may want to, anybody from CARB may want to weigh in on that as well. So I think, and you can also look at the diesel particulate map from Cal EnviroScreen to look at where you're getting a fair amount of diesel particulate pollution, and it tracks pretty well with where the larger concentrations of warehouses are. So I think a lot of work has been done that we can look at that demonstrates that the warehouses have an impact, just like the port and the border. But I agree with you that there could be some relationships here with charging, and especially as Sandag has noted that so many of these charging stations will be depot charging. So much of that could be at those warehouses, at least the larger ones.
Thank you, Jack, Natasha, and Diane. Did want to give time for other folks who have their hand raised, starting with Janice and Montserrat.
Thank you.
Creo que estaba Janice antes que yo.
Sí, dije Janice.
Muchas gracias. Thank you. My concern is regarding the hydrogen fueling stations. We have yet to see, how that plays out as far as safety and best practices. I'm not sure if there's stringent safety parameters or to prevent explosion. Just thinking in prevention and liability. Can we ensure that because we don't know what that's going to look like in the next coming years, can we ensure that they're not going to be near our schools or churches or hospitals or other educational institutions that are filled with people most of the time? That's one concern. Also vulnerable population in our most vulnerable communities. I'm really hoping that is taken into consideration, and that if they are going to be implemented, that they're in spaces and areas that are not highly populated. Thank you.
Thank you for your question or comment too. Yeah, so within the report, we definitely take your concerns into consideration and have noted safety concerns and best practices. We don't have any specific citing recommendations or anything like that. So we would definitely want to work with the community as we start to look more into hydrogen and just learn more about that. But I'll definitely bring that up to the team. So thank you again. I'll just note super quick too, sorry not to cut you off. Within our implementation strategies report, that talks a lot more about hydrogen safety concerns. So I would take a look at that, and then any feedback or comments that you have for us for the final blueprint too, we would love to hear about that if there's any areas that we can address better. Thanks.
Montserrat?
¿Sigo, Chuy?
Sí.
Ok, sorry, no escuché. Bueno, para mí la pregunta sería, pues, ¿cuál sería la estrategia en cuanto a las estaciones de carga eléctrica para asegurar que estén en toda la región? Porque, bueno, sabemos que en las comunidades portuarias, pues sí va a haber, ¿verdad? Pues es donde más cercas están entrando y saliendo los trucks. Pero pues también sus viajes, algunos tienen viajes más largos o viajes más cortos, como sea, se va a necesitar asegurar que esas estaciones de carga estén a lo largo de la región. Y también mi preocupación es por...
Montserrat, se te puso en mute tu micrófono.
Perdón. Lo último que quería nada más decir es mi preocupación por las estaciones de hidrógeno, porque ya hemos visto anteriormente, o por lo menos yo que he estudiado un poquito de esto, que nos han presentado o nos han dado presentaciones de cómo es tan volátil el hidrógeno y el problema que puede haber con explosiones o derrames, asegurar que nuestras comunidades estén seguras con estas estaciones. Gracias.
Is there the translation for the question?
Yes, Natasha. We actually had interpretation on, but apologies if you weren't on it.
Oh no, okay, I'm so sorry.
Montserrat basically wanted to emphasize to make sure, basically comment that that charging infrastructure is distributed equitably across the county, and also raise concerns regarding hydrogen stations and their potential impact on communities.
Okay. Yeah, for charging infrastructure, definitely looking at placing it equitably across the county, really considering where it's needed, and especially with those public charging stations as well, not only the depot and private charging. And then as far as the hydrogen concerns, thank you very much for bringing up your concern. As I had mentioned, we do have those safety concerns and best practices kind of further in our implementation strategies report, and I've tried to loop it back into some other reports as we've heard the concerns come up from you all. So definitely please take a look at those reports and let us know if there's anything else you think we could address better, and we'll keep researching ourselves as well. Thank you.
Natasha, gracias, Montserrat. Did want to raise that Keith added a comment in the chat that the city of San Diego and the port have begun discussions analyzing what will be needed to equip our city and state roads in preparation for increased weight loads of electric trucks. Priority for the discussion being the truck routes to from port terminals through BL. Feel free to expand on that, Keith.
Sorry, Barrio Logan.
Barrio Logan. Thank you. Any comments there, Natasha?
Sure, yeah, thank you for your comment, Keith. We definitely know that these trucks are going to be weighing a lot more with these heavy batteries. We look in our strategies report to address those weight concerns, for infrastructure needs, and also, I don't know if this is really relevant to your question or if you had interest in this, but talking about exemptions for weight limits as well. But yeah, we'll definitely keep that in mind as far as strategies go and when we work on things with the port in the future.
Yeah, it was just an aside. I understand that it's somewhat peripheral to this discussion, but understanding that in many cases the state is the entity that will grant exceptions to weight exceedances for city and state roads. We're beginning conversations with Caltrans, as I know the port is as well, just to begin discussing those. Obviously, we all know that these conversations are happening up and down the state, as Phil and I were discussing. So it's not as if this is going to be a new or novel question coming out of San Diego. But obviously, as we move towards truck electrification, cities are going to be wondering how to make their maintenance cost recoverable, because it just means ultimately increased wear and tear on roads with those higher weights. So just understanding that those issues will be happening in tandem.
Yeah, thank you. Very much agree.
Can I just say to Keith that that's a conversation that's happening at CARB as well? And there's conversations happening with the federal Department of Transportation as well to try to address those issues. So thanks for addressing them at the local level as well.
Sure. Thanks, Dan.
See 2 more hands raised, and I think after that we can move on to the next agenda item. Dinah, followed by Nick.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Natasha and Diane, for presenting. I honestly have not read the blueprint yet, so my questions you may already have included in there. But as a utility, we're definitely looking at planning to make sure that the grid is available for all the decarbonization that will be happening in our region. And so we have been reaching out to some of our larger customers who do plan on having large electric vehicle loads at their sites. You know, lots of the package delivery types of companies, etc. And so I was just wondering, with the truck stops, have you identified areas where they would actually be ideally located at this time?
No,
not yet. Okay.
Not in this blueprint report, maybe in future phases, but yeah, not in this report itself. But we do talk about prioritizing partnerships with the utilities and being able to work together on that too. Once we do maybe look at more of those sites, recommending site locations, having that partnership will help a lot.
All right, thank you.
Dinah and Natasha. Nick?
You know, I think Dinah kind of beat me to that question. I was going to ask if and when we can expect a Sandag report that kind of gives like an estimate of where charging stations are located throughout the county. So yeah, just wanted to touch on that, and then also just comment on elevate again the concerns about hydrogen. You know, I think a big concern from community members is this idea that our disadvantaged communities become testing grounds for, you know, a technology that's prone to leaking and explosions. And so if there's a blueprint that's kind of trying to allocate these stations throughout the county, making sure that communities that are already overburdened with so many different types of risk aren't getting an additional burden by putting hydrogen plants in the neighborhoods. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. As for the locations, like I mentioned, that's something we would love to do in the future. I don't have any like guarantee or identification for site locations right now. And then thank you again for your hydrogen comment. We definitely want to consider and you know, make sure things are equitable when we're supporting these sort of things. So thank you again.
Thank you, everybody. And Tasha, if folks have questions, is there an email they can reach out to? Oh, yeah, perfect.
There you go. Yeah, I'm on the project team. Jeff Oyos, he wasn't able to be here today, but he's the PM. So reach out to either of us. I included the link in the chat. I can send it again in case anyone didn't see it. But yeah, feel free to reach out whenever. And like I said, we will be sending out the draft soon. It's just getting finished. So we'll make sure that you guys get that link and can provide your written comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha and Diane.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next agenda item. We have Diane again from EHC, as well as Lisa Madsen from the Port of San Diego, as well as Zach, who will also be participating in this presentation. I'll hand it off to you all.
Thanks, Chewy. I think you're getting way too much of me tonight. So I'll just introduce this item. Thank you for introducing everyone. Again, Environmental Health Coalition has been partnering with the Port of San Diego on this small fleet trucker outreach. And we've also been happy to have other partners with the Air Pollution Control District, CalSTART, and SDG&E. And so I'll be just introducing this presentation, and Phil and Lisa and Zach will fill it out, and then we'll come back at the end for comments and questions that anyone may have about the program. So if we could get the next slide, please. So again, this is a really important program, we think, that will help to accomplish some of the SERP goals related to transitioning diesel trucks to zero emission trucks 5 years ahead of the California requirements, which is noted in the SERP. And that we have determined that we really need to reach out to small fleet owners and truck drivers, single owner operators, to make sure that they have information about the opportunities that they have to get incentives now, the technical assistance they can get from the port, from CalSTART, CalFleet, and we wanted to make sure that they all knew about it. So it really coincides with the goals of the SERP. Next slide, please. And so the purpose of the program, as I was saying, is to inform the truckers about the rules. A lot of people just don't know about them. Very importantly for small truckers is to provide resources to those truckers so that they understand what the incentives are, and to provide technical assistance to them. So Phil and Lisa, can I turn it over to you?
Sure. Thank you, Diane. As Diane mentioned, my name is Lisa Madsen, and I'm a senior planner at the Port of San Diego. The purpose of this program, again, is to educate and prepare drivers regarding upcoming regulations, inform them of funding and incentive programs for zero emission trucks, and to provide technical assistance. Next slide, please. The Port and EHC have conducted 4 outreach events earlier this year at 10th Avenue Marine Terminal, or TAMT, providing information regarding regulations as well as funding opportunities. EHC provided refreshments and food for attendees, and staff also conducted a survey with small fleet owners and followed up with drivers expressing interest in zero emissions initiatives. Port staff has also participated in other zero emissions outreaches, such as SDG&E's EV Fleet Day, the Harbor Trucking Association's Ride and Drive event, and CARB and CalSTART's Zero Emission Truck Showcase Ride and Drive, which was held just last week. Next slide, please. And here's some photos of our recent outreach efforts. As you can see, we had tables set up ready to go with information as well as swag. We were able to speak with drivers to provide information, conduct surveys, and listen to their thoughts regarding the transition to zero emissions trucks. And that's about it from my side of the presentation. So thank you for letting me speak on this, and I'll turn it over to Zach Gomez now.
Hi, Zachary Francisco Gomez, he, him, his, with Environmental Health Coalition. I was the boots on the ground. In these pictures, you see that we are doing outreach. So we're collecting information, whether electric or paper. We're getting truck age, mileage, their routes, their knowledge of zero emission rules, and their interest in acquiring incentives. And if they knew that funding was available, a lot of good funding. Next slide. Same thing, getting electric and directing them down to get some free food, free drinks, just talking with them about the incentives and how the money is now before it dries up. And next slide. And yep, more pictures of the outreach. There we go. Survey results. So this was where we got 56 trucker surveys completed, and that 56 had been called for a second survey. Only 16 referred to CalFleet. So 16 out of the 56, they said, yes, I am ready for my next step to move on to the Cal Fleet Assistance, and where they figure out where they are in their path to applying for that grant for the transition to zero electric, to going to electric vehicle. Our challenges that we expressed were access to charging was the main one, the truck range, again, how heavy, and then the weight restrictions on the road. Daily mileage, we were looking at 200 to 500, and there were a handful, because we call them drayage, which means they're going from port to port or from dock to dock, and most likely some of them were just going for National City to the 10th Avenue and back. So those were the best candidates for these grant monies. Thank you very much. I will pass it on to Diane.
Thanks, Zach. I just wanted to say that, this was really a team effort, as you saw in the photos. You could see that everybody came together. The port was great in providing us all with the space. Everybody brought materials. I think everybody was prepared to really help the truckers, and Zach did a fantastic job of not only talking with the truckers there on the site, but then following up and calling them. These are tough folks to get hold of, to say, because they're on the road. They're busy. They're working many hours a day, and really, having to pay attention to what they're doing. So it's they're not like all of us who are sitting around in a meeting. It's hard to get them to be able to come to a meeting like this, although that was our dream. Was that we really could get folks to come and talk to us about what their challenges are. But everybody's doing that in a different way. So if we could go to the next slide, please. These were some of the lessons that were learned. And I think, Phil, were you going to go through these?
You can, or I can.
Why don't you? They've heard enough.
Sure, yeah. So as we've discussed already, one of the biggest barriers for quick adoption of these vehicles is the infrastructure. So that's one thing that we heard loud and clear from the truck drivers, is that the need for infrastructure. And actually, I'll share a little story. When we were out there doing our outreach, one of the truck drivers that works at the port came over to us, and he actually had an application in his hand for some funding through the Air Pollution Control District for electric trucks. He's like, I'm ready for my electric truck. And we were thrilled to see somebody come to us with, that kind of excitement. And then he said, but where am I going to charge it? And we asked, well, where do you park your trucks at night? That's probably the first place to think about. And he said, well, he parks some trucks over on this road over here, and some other trucks on a parking lot where his friend has space up in Otay Mesa. And so it quickly occurred to us that this guy, unfortunately, does not have a place to charge his vehicles. He doesn't really even have a home base for his vehicle. So, that's the reality out there with the drayage trucking community, is that they may not have that place. So, finding the charging for them is something that we're trying to do at the port. And we'll talk about that more tonight, and even next month when we talk about our EV truck stop that the port's trying to develop. Definitely when we talk to the truck drivers, as Diane said, they're not talking about zero emission trucks as much as we have over the past several years. They're certainly not going to carb workshops that last 3 to 5 hours. I am, Diane is, and Lisa and Zach are, but they're not. And I find that unfortunately there's a knowledge gap when it comes to zero emission vehicles. How to acquire them, how to operate them, how are they going to take that new paradigm into their logistics? It's a whole new world for them. The funding, although there's a lot, it's sort of complicated to understand how to get it. The regulations were literally just adopted by CARB, recently. So there's a huge learning curve that needs to happen. And I think that education, while it may not be the most exciting part of this, it's absolutely necessary. Lots of concerns about range of the vehicles, concerns about weight of the vehicles that we heard a little bit earlier. There's concern about specialty types of vehicles. All trucks are not created equal. They're very different in their applications. They have different trailers on them. They use hydraulic lifts and other power mechanisms to do things in the back of the truck that are just beginning to occur in this electric truck space. So there's some apprehension there. And anytime there's apprehension, it keeps them from adopting the vehicle at the pace that we would like them to. So that's definitely needs to be overcome. And incentives, to that point that I just mentioned, incentives may not always influence them right away. Here at the port, we have a pot of funding. The Air Pollution Control District has funding. We've been offering a pretty good incentive to our truck drivers to adopt these vehicles, and they haven't taken it up quite yet. We have great opportunities, and we're going to work on those as much we can. But even just the money is not enough yet for some of these folks. So getting that infrastructure in place, educating them about these vehicles, and trying to overcome those barriers that we talked about. For example, allowance for heavy weights, I think will go a little bit of a ways to help them adopt the vehicles. All right, next slide. Dan, did you want to cover this one?
Sure. I think there's a lot of the same issues that Phil just went over. We really need to figure out new ways to educate and involve truckers, and particularly the small fleets. So we're really looking for your ideas for how to do that, because it's really difficult, as we said, to connect with the truckers and to have them have time for it. And I know that the Cal Fleet Advisor is such a great model. This is direct one-on-one consultation that they're providing for the truckers. They take their particular situation into account and help them apply for the incentives that work for them, related to the age of their truck, how far they go. All of those kinds of things are taken into consideration. And there's massive amounts of money available. So the closer we get to the regulation being required, the less money there's going to be. So we really want to encourage people to take advantage of the dollars now. The charging infrastructure, that's, if we're going to review the tape of this meeting, we'll have said that like 47 times, right? This is the key thing that really needs to happen. The incentives. We need to think about new business models, and I know that the Otay Chamber folks were talking about that the other day at the Ride and Drive. I think Phil and others at the port have been talking about business models that they might be able to participate in that would help some of the truckers afford these trucks and be able to charge them and have a home base for them, as Phil was describing. And then what are the other policy considerations that we need to take into account? The weight is an issue, and that's going to be an issue at the federal level, as well as at the state level with Caltrans. And as Keith brought up, I think it's really important. And then completing the port truck inventory, so we know exactly what we're working with, and trying to work with the fleets that are serving the port the most, so that we can be really responsive to them. And I think putting on my CARB hat for a second, I really think that CARB wants to hear these stories, so that if there's challenges, we need to hear about it, so that if there's new policies that need to come forward, or different ways that the incentives should be allocated, that's information that CARB needs to get as well. So unless one of my colleagues has anything to add, I think it's really important that we turn it to all of you to see what advice, what questions, comments you have about this program, and how we can do better and expand it. So Chewy, I guess back to you, and to facilitate any discussion or comments from the group.
Yes, thanks everybody. That was a great presentation. Folks have any questions or comments, please feel free to raise your hand so I can call on you. And I did want to just raise a comment from Bruce at CARB that offered to partner on any future outreach efforts on behalf of CARB. I'm seeing a comment suggestion from Josephine, perhaps setting up at the truck stops in terms of reaching out to the independent drivers.
Oh, yes. We actually did have one outreach at a truck stop, but that's a really great idea to, like, we were just literally brainstorming on ways to reach out to those smaller independent drivers. So that's something we're definitely working on. Thank you.
Lisa. Any other questions or comments on the outreach program? Kathy? You're on mute, Kathy. I'm not sure why. Still can't hear you. Got it. Okay, if you feel free to add it in the chat.
It could be a mic issue if she selects a different mic.
Is there anyone folks could contact to learn more about the program and ask questions?
Well, you're welcome to contact either Lisa Manson or I to learn about what we're doing here to help truck drivers get into zero emission trucks, which is pretty much everything you see on the slide right in front of you. We also put in the chat the Cal Fleet Advisor link. So this is the state's program for providing technical assistance to truck drivers. So I think that's a good place to send folks to. If any of you are truck drivers or you have family or friends that are truck drivers, definitely send them along that link. That'll be very helpful.
Thank you, Phil and Lisa. And yes, looks like Kathy just wanted to remind folks that the district does have funds for both trucks and infrastructure. And another suggestion from Justin, possibly partnering with DMV on specific targeting.
Well, I think, yeah, that's a great idea. DMV as well as, well, the port has it and CARB has the list of drayage truckers who are registered to serve the Port of San Diego. So those truckers can be contacted. All of their contact information is there, and I think it's an opportunity to connect up with them. And I also see that Bruce has said that CARB did a successful event at Port of Long Beach. And so that's a great turnout. I think, again, events are another way to get this done, but I think we also are thinking we've got to do more kind of one-on-one or direct contact with them. So thanks, Bruce. And Josie, your idea about truck stops, you know, we don't have as many here, but yes, again, that's another thing to do, is to hang out at truck stops.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to the presentation team. And we'll be sure to share the presentation. I believe it might be posted on the website, if not later this week. Great. Moving on to our last presentation item. I wanted to hand it over to Nick and Phil again to present on initial concepts for a potential MOU between the Air District and the Port of San Diego. Nick?
Great. Thank you, Chewy. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Just wanted to thank the Portside Steering Committee for allowing us to be here today to discuss this topic. And again, my name is Nick Cormier. I'm a Rural Development Supervisor at APCD. We have a number of staff at APCD that have been working on this, as well as port staff, and they can certainly introduce themselves later further in the discussions in the presentation. But I did want to just quickly turn it over to Phil. You already heard from him a little bit in the previous presentation, but if he wanted to introduce himself and his team, I'll go ahead and give him the time.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Nick. Again, Phil Gibbons with the Port of San Diego. I'm a program director in environment and sustainability within our planning department at the port. I'm joined by a variety of port colleagues too that can help answer any questions as they may come up tonight. Renee Yarmy, Peter Eicher, and Joel Valenzuela. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Phil. So before going on to the next slide, I did just want to note that nothing we're discussing tonight is set in stone. We're really here today at this early stage to hear from you all to see if we're heading in the right direction or if we need to think about ideas that we haven't thought of yet. So with that said, we can go ahead and move to the next slide. So why are we discussing an MOU? Back in June of this year, the APCD Governing Board directed staff to pursue a potential Memorandum of Understanding, or an MOU, with the Port of San Diego. The intent of the MOU would be to collaborate with port staff on possible emission reduction strategies to achieve emission reductions from port operations and to collaborate on projects that would support SERP and MCAS goals. Our board also asked APCD staff to come back in December with an update on the discussions with the port. Since that time, both agencies have been in preliminary discussions about what a MOU might focus on. Today, we'll share some initial ideas about what we've discussed, but again, we're really looking forward to hearing from you about those concepts and others that you might have in mind, as well as the schedule and the next steps. I'll be doing the first half of the presentation, and then I'll turn things over to Phil for the second half. Next slide, please. So first off, we did want to remind everyone of how this item relates to the Portside SERP. This potential MOU is likely to have a connection and support many of the SERP goals listed on the slide. We're hopeful that a potential MOU plays a key role in reducing diesel particulate matter in the community, increasing zero-emission equipment and charging opportunities at indirect sources, and pushes the Harbor Drive 2.0 concept further forward. We're also addressing Action C3 in the Portside SERP, which calls out for an evaluation of existing actions in relation to indirect sources which attract mobile source activity. Next slide, please. So here are the potential concept categories that the port and APCD staff have been preliminarily discussing. On the left side of the screen, you'll see are the concept categories that are under consideration for both agencies. These include emission reductions from cargo handling equipment, furthering the port's zero-emission truck program, supporting investments into charging infrastructure to charge zero-emission equipment, and ensuring access to incentives and grants remain open. On the right side are concept categories that still require discussion to flesh out specific concepts within those categories. These include ideas around ocean-going vessels, vehicles owned and operated by the port, opportunities to enhance public participation and transparency, and possibilities for utilizing maritime industrial impact funding. We'll be getting into the concept categories on the left a little bit later in the presentation, but again, we're just hoping to hear from you on whether these categories are hitting the mark or not. Next slide, please. Here's the proposed timeline for taking a possible MOU to both the port and APCD's respective boards. We're here today having initial discussions and getting feedback. In December, both port and APCD staff tentatively plan to take presentations to each of our respective boards to provide updates on potential concepts being explored and to hear from board members. I want to stress that the December board meetings will not be considering the MOU itself. These will be preliminary discussions to hear board member feedback. After the December board meetings, we'd work on drafting specific language and re-engage with maritime stakeholders, tenants, this committee, and the public to make sure that there are additional opportunities to provide feedback on the specific language. We'll then seek to have our respective board consider the final MOU language in the summer of next year. Of course, all of these timelines are tentative and subject to change. Next slide, please. So this slide should be just a refresher to most in this committee, but it's important to remember why we're trying to improve air quality in the Portside area. Indirect sources of air pollution primarily emit two types of pollutants: nitrogen oxides of NOx, which is a precursor to ground level ozone, and diesel particulate matter, or DPM. NOx and DPM are emitted from different types of sources, but most notably from mobile sources such as on-road and off-road vehicles. Elevated exposure to both pollutants can cause many respiratory and cardiovascular symptoms, the most common of which are on this slide and are a public health concern. Next slide, please. So a lot of planning has been done in recent years as to how the air quality can improve in Portside, and some of these planning reports are listed on this slide. These reinforce that both of our agencies are strategically aligned to be able to discuss and implement a possible MOU for indirect sources of emissions around the Port Tidelands. These include the aforementioned SERP, as well as the Port's Maritime Clean Air Strategy, both of which include aggressive goals to improve public health and air quality around the port. There have also been several risk assessments done to see what emission sources pose the highest cancer risk around the community. On a more global perspective, a lot of risk is associated with mobile source activity outside of the Port Tidelands. However, the Port Tidelands themselves, cargo handling equipment, poses the highest residential cancer risk in Barrio Logan in particular, representing a category where we think significant health benefits could be achieved from cleaning up that category alone. Finally, APCD's regional air quality strategy also reinforced the district commitment to reduce emissions from indirect sources to support our efforts to attain state and federal ozone standards. Next slide, please. So I've been referring to indirect sources a few times already, but I just want to remind everyone about what exactly an indirect source is. The Federal Clean Air Act defines an indirect source as a facility, building, structure, installation, real property, road, or highway, which attracts or may attract mobile sources of pollution. That could really be applying to a lot of different situations. And as you can see in the diagram on the slide, a lot of different facilities in the goods movement sector tend to attract mobile sources of air pollution like trucks and rail. In 2019, California Assembly Bill 423 was adopted and further directed APCD staff to explore opportunities for further emission reductions at indirect sources, such as ports, warehouses, and distribution centers. To address ports, we are exploring this potential MOU as a way to achieve significant benefits in short order. APCD is also exploring possible regulatory and non-regulatory strategies to reduce indirect source emissions from warehouses and distribution centers as part of a separate effort, and has recently set up a warehouse working group to explore possible ways to reduce emissions from those sectors. We highly encourage folks to participate and provide feedback through that working group, and feel free to reach out to us if you'd like more information about how to participate in that effort. Next slide, please. Okay, there we go. Just delayed on my end. Reducing emissions from indirect sources is challenging due to complex federal and state laws in place. Put simply, a local air district doesn't have the regulatory authority to directly require trucks, trains, and commercial hovercraft to P0 emission by a specific date. Such direct authority rests with CARB and EPA. However, other pathways do exist and that can achieve its significant emission reductions from these sources, and an MOU is one of them. Some recent examples include South Coast AQMD's multiple MOUs with various airports in the LA region, as well as a proposed MOU being explored with rail operators and rail yards to reduce emissions that is planning to be considered for adoption in early 2024. There are also recent examples of ISRs in place, but it remains to be seen whether similar rules could be implemented in our region. For example, South Coast AQMD Rule 2305 is an ISR applicable to warehouses. Though this rule is adopted, it's currently steeped in litigation with an uncertain future, despite EPA proposing approval of the rule at the federal level just recently. AQMD is also looking at a possible ISR specifically for the container terminals at the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, but not a lot of information has been shared publicly yet about that effort. Next slide, please. So what exactly is an MOU? In short, it's an agreement between two willing parties that include enforceable terms. It's non-regulatory in the sense that an MOU is not a typical rule that a local agency would adopt. However, it's nonetheless still a binding contract between the two entities involved used to achieve mutual goals. Every MOU can be a little different, but every MOU basically includes 5 major components. It describes the mutually agreeable and common goals, as well as the actions each party must implement. It also describes procedures and alternative pathways about how the MOU will be carried out, as well as the process and remedies to be taken if such actions aren't completed as agreed to. Next slide, please. Diving a little bit deeper, what exactly are the logistical differences between an MOU versus a possible ISR rule? On the MOU side shown in the blue box, there are several distinct advantages of an MOU. An MOU can provide a much more efficient and timely pathway to tangible emission reductions and health benefits, while a rulemaking could take years to develop and several more years to implement. Any ISR rulemaking effort at the port is expected to be very complex, with uncertain precedents, legal issues, and a confluence of international and federal laws in place. An MOU can also maintain access to incentive funding to affected entities, whereas a rule could significantly limit those opportunities. MOUs can also provide more flexibility to address zero-emission infrastructure upgrades, potentially in ways an ISR rule may not be able to achieve. The Port and APCD also have a track record of successful implementation of MOUs and MOAs in past programs. ISR rules would provide more regulatory certainty in the long term, but that said, most MOUs and ISRs are enforceable, consistent with CARB and CARB statewide regulations, and focus on the highest criteria emission sources to reduce emissions and public health. Because of this, and to quickly make progress in relation to SERP and MCAS goals, both agencies feel an MOU is appropriate at this point in time. Next slide, please. With that background in place, I now want to turn our attention back to the concept categories we previously mentioned. As a reminder, the items on the left side of the screen are areas in which the agencies have made some progress in preliminary discussions. These include the areas of cargo handling equipment, zero-emission trucks, zero-emission infrastructure, and incentives and grants. Phil will be explaining a little bit more of these topics in a few minutes, but afterward, we want to hear your feedback on if we're heading in the right direction or not on any of the categories on the slides. Next slide, please. The one aspect the Port and APCD have been discussing is acknowledging the work that the Port and APCD have already taken to support SERP and MCAS goals. As such, we envision the MOU may account and reference some of these investments and actions that the port tenants, and APCD have taken over the past few years to ensure that those milestones do not get overlooked. These include, but are not limited to, the recent addition of the electric harbor crane, electric infrastructure at 10th Avenue and National City Marine terminals, as well as the cruise ship terminal and cargo handling equipment, the nation's first all-electric tugboat, which will be in the water soon, a new bonnet system that will reduce emissions from cargo ships, as well as other successful projects, including a vessel speed reduction program, the PAIR program, which this committee has heard a little bit about, and the free ride around National City Electric shuttle program. So collectively, all of these projects will help advance SERP and MCAS goals and help support some of the concept categories we'll be exploring in this MOU, which you will now hear a little bit more about from Phil. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Phil now.
All right. Well, thanks, Nick. Actually, can you progress to the next slide, please? Okay, great. So our first category that we wanted to talk to you about is cargo handling equipment. So the goal for us in this MOU would be to hasten the turnover of diesel cargo handling equipment to zero emission cargo handling equipment. And just so you know what cargo handling equipment, this is the equipment that's located on our marine cargo terminals to move freight around the terminal itself. You usually don't see this type of equipment out on the roads. So you may not be familiar with it, but these include things like yard tractors. The picture there on the right is what we call a yard tractor. Sort of looks like a truck, operates much like a truck, but is not a truck. And you won't see that on the roadway, but you'll see them on the terminal moving containers around. Also lifting equipment like forklifts or reach stackers, things that move heavy freight, as well as cranes, etc. So that's what we mean when we're talking about cargo handling equipment. when we did our health risk assessment last year, we identified that cargo handling equipment among the sources of pollution that is part of our maritime operations, that cargo handling equipment was one of the sources that has the most health risk to the communities nearby. So this transition to zero emissions is very important. And in fact, of course, our MCAS has a goal to convert priority pieces of cargo equipment as quickly as possible. And that would ultimately reduce about 80% of diesel particulate matter, as well as 90% of NOx emissions from those from that category. Through this MOU, what we've been discussing is a commitment to convert that equipment. The port could share data with APCD, the types of equipment that's used, their use characteristics. APCD could estimate the amount of incentives that could qualify to quickly turn over those pieces of equipment to zero emission, and also provide priority funding for our tenants to take advantage of APCD's funding to turn the equipment over to zero emission. So as you may know, APCD manages a variety of great funding throughout our region, and it's open to everybody in the air basin and in the county. But what we're talking about here is potentially having prioritized funding for our tenants and our operators that operate at the port to get first dibs on some of that money. And if it's not used by them, it'd go back into the general fund. But the idea is to have prioritized funding for them, because oftentimes we may not be included or get the funding we need from the local air district to turn over equipment, and having that prioritized funding would be helpful to make that transition as quickly as possible. So that's one concept we've been talking about. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the next concept is regarding planning and deployment of infrastructure to support port electrification. As you've heard tonight, you've heard it loud and clear, infrastructure is the foundation for moving to zero emissions and electric equipment. So what the port would commit to in this concept area would be to complete plans, which are like the engineering plans, et cetera, for port electrification, how we would modernize our electrical infrastructure to support new load growth, electrical load growth at the terminal, figure out where distributed energy resources like solar, battery storage could be implemented to help with the grid, figure out locations where electric vehicle charging equipment could be stationed. As we've talked about, this is foundational for any movement towards electrification. The port would do that planning, would present that to the community, present that to our respective boards, and hopefully get funding to actually implement those. And by having this as a basis, a foundation for ourselves, we would also be able to perhaps go after major grants that are offered by the state and federal government. All right, next concept, please. Okay, trucks. So trucks, of course, are an important part of our maritime clean air strategy, as well as the community emission reduction plan. We perhaps include our most aggressive goals in the MCAS is to quicken the transition to zero emission vehicles operating at our port. You know, as we talked about, the regulations in California have just been adopted. So it's very important that we start focusing on this category. Through this MOU, we would continue to advance zero emission pilot projects. So getting our truckers on board with zero emission trucks, and perhaps create more incentives, have incentives for this transition to occur. We talked about that throughout the night, that's really important. One thing that we could think about at the port level, is having funding set aside to stack against other incentives throughout the state. So kind of sweeten the deal to transition these vehicles over. We have methods, other mechanisms at the port that we could utilize is with new agreements with our tenants and operators. We could also provide incentives, as well as if and when we develop that EV truck stop, we could potentially have incentives to lower the charging costs or something. So I guess what I'm saying is to be determined on exactly what that incentive could be, but that would be something that we would like to hear about tonight and that we're thinking about. And then lastly, on the port truck registry, proceed with continuing that program, collecting information on trucks that are coming to the port and sharing that information with the Portside community and others so that we understand what the challenge is ahead of us to transition. Okay, next concept. Okay, funding and outreach. This is, again, you've heard a lot about funding and incentives tonight. Some of the ideas that we're thinking about is creating new funding incentive programs to transition cargo handling equipment and trucks and other equipment to zero emissions. There's a lot of traditional incentives that APCD administers and the port provides. And one thing we'd like to talk about with the community tonight is perhaps having new forms of incentive programs. These will all be subject to our separate board approval and to CARB, of course, but any way that we can help increase the speed of adoption, we'd like to think about that. We also know that there's a ton of federal money coming through the Inflation Reduction Act at the federal level that will be important for us to position ourselves for. And the port and APCD through this MOU would help support each other, apply for funding as necessary. It could even apply for that funding together. And lastly, we talked a lot earlier about education and outreach being very important. And through this MOU, the port and APCD would agree to continue education and engagement initiatives to help educate folks about the switch to zero emission. All right, next slide. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. And now tonight we're looking for some feedback from you all on the concepts that we've discussed. We're happy to hear your input on any of those concepts. If you have other concepts, we'd like to take note of that as well. We have some questions here that can prime the pump for the group. And I believe we're going to have a word cloud exercise. Is that right, Chewy? On the first question, regarding what specific elements do you think are important to include in this MOU? So I'll let you kick that off, Chewy.
Thank you, Phil and Nick. So my colleague Anna will add a link to the chat, and Johnny is going to pull up the word cloud on her screen. So if you take a moment to please click that link, it will open your browser and prompt you to the first question, asking what specific elements do you think are important to include in an MOU? ¿Qué elementos específicos cree que es importante incluir en un MOU? And if you have any issues with the link, feel free to just add it in the chat and someone in our team can add it to the word cloud.
And I would just add on here, as we're starting to get responses, you know, this is the word cloud. We're really just trying to, as Phil mentioned, prime the pump, so to speak. We're certainly here to hear your comments and feedback verbally as well, but we also wanted to provide a nonverbal option of sorts in case folks didn't want to speak up. But we are certainly welcome and are willing to hear from you verbally at this time as well as the responses continue to roll in.
Thank you for that, Nick. On that note, if you'd like to expand on the phrase or words you submitted on Mentimeter, feel free to raise your hand and elaborate more. Maritza? I think you're still on mute.
Sorry, yeah, I forgot to mute it. Thank you, and thank you for that presentation. This is all really cool. I just wanted to expand on, so I put accountability measures. You know, I just want to ensure that what is said is actually done and make sure that we have points that we can check up and make sure that we're like on the right track. So just ensuring that we have some kind of accountability in the MOU to be able to point back to, and these are the goals that we had, and we can point to them and really hone in on if there's anything lacking, or if maybe we're even on the positive, like we're up ahead, and we can proceed in that way. But yeah, just wanted to emphasize the accountability.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, and I do think we are thinking about that. That is certainly we're having discussions with both of our agencies on that exact topic as we speak. So that what that looks like and what that entails, we're not quite sure yet, but we're definitely thinking in that vein. I don't know, Phil, if you wanted to add anything on that, but
no, I would just reiterate, thanks for the comment. And also Nick kind of talked about the benefits of an MOU. I mean, it is an agreement between our two parties so that we would be accountable for achieving them. And then of course, reporting back to this CAC as you wish.
Anyone else want to elaborate on the element or elements they added to the word cloud? Nick?
Yeah. So, as this conversation was happening, I was kind of thinking about some of the conversations that are already happening with the subcommittees here at the CSC. So like the SERP implementation group has been talking about new standards for port tenants. And so like I think to include in the MOU, I think it would be really powerful to have some language about making sure that new tenants have commitments for ZEV trucks, and having that included in the agreement that you all create. Yeah, just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Nick.
Joy?
Yeah, I think several people have mentioned this in one form or another in the word cloud, but I think that one aspect of accountability and transparency are regular reports back to the public and to the steering committee specifically, so that we can track how it's going and weigh in on that.
I have a question on that, Joy. Is there a frequency, and in case there's a recording, this is Renee Yarmy from the Port of San Diego. Is there a frequency that you think that reporting should be considered that we may look at as part of this MOU? That's a question we've had internally.
Yeah, and I'm not set on any one frequency. Monthly or quarterly, maybe somewhere along those lines. Maybe every other month.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joy. We'll certainly take that into account as we're looking further into this potential MOU language.
And other just some observations of the word cloud. So I'm assuming the bigger the word is, that's like people have written that a couple times. Okay, so transparency is in the middle. We've heard a little bit about that today. They're switching. Oh, look at funding became big, and incentives are big. So we've heard a lot tonight about incentives and funding, and that's, I think, a lot of the conversations that APCD and the port has had is about that, because we know that that's going to be important for trying to do what we need to do, especially in a quick manner. So I think that's good feedback for us. And I would also just let the steering committee know that you're a powerful force. We as steering committee members can advocate not only to APCD for new forms of funding, use of AB 617 dollars in a certain way, as well as advocate at the state level through the California Resource Board's investment plans for certain types of funding availability for cargo handling equipment and trucks and other things. So just want to make sure that you guys all know that your input on that specific area is very helpful.
So, unless there are no other further elaborations on what folks shared in the word cloud, I think we can move on to the next questions on the PowerPoint. Joanny? And at this point, yeah, would welcome any questions folks may have or additional comments on any of the various concepts that were shared.
Yeah, just to reiterate on the other two questions, we were probably getting a little bit of a mixture of comments in regards to all three, but so that second question, that the MOU provides an opportunity to include actions that maybe not be possible in a regulation. Are there any specific actions you think APCD and the port could include in this agreement? And then the third one, which was of the concepts you heard today, which one resonates with you and which ones could use improvement?
Feel free to raise your hand. And if there's anything you didn't understand, feel free to ask as well. I know it was a lot of content.
And certainly this isn't going to be the last time you hear about this from us. I mean, understandably, there's a lot to digest right now. There could be more to digest down the road, but you know, we can certainly have discussions offline as well if that's easier. I see someone's hand up, Montserrat.
Yes. And friendly reminder to feel free to join the English channel for folks giving Spanish comment. Montserrat?
Sí, pues mi pregunta sería, ¿qué pasaría cuando no se cumplen con estos acuerdos? ¿Va a haber consecuencias o como es nomás, no es algo que sea legal, sino que es nomás un acuerdo entre estas agencias? ¿Qué va a pasar si no se cumplen con los acuerdos? ¿Va a haber fechas límites que se van a cumplir o cómo nos vamos a cerciorar que sí se va a cumplir con este acuerdo?
Gracias, Montserrat.
Sure. That's a great question. So that is, again, kind of the concepts we're going to be further exploring. It's one of the areas where we have had some preliminary discussions with the port and APCD about what compliance, compliance with an MOU, what does that look like? There's different ways that MOUs do it. Some are more regulatory in nature. Some are a little bit more conflict prevention in nature. So we're looking at a number of things right now. And this really goes both ways. We're talking about an MOU between the port and APCD, where the port is looking at commitments, the APCD is looking at commitments. So that would, any kind of remedies or conflict prevention would really cut both ways. And then in terms of deadlines, that again is, I think, something we're going to have to continue talking about with the port. And again, it'll kind of fall into what it looks like, what type of measures would go in there. I would echo also what Phil said to I think the first commenter, in that, these are binding contracts. An MOU basically is a binding contract between two parties, and that there are pathways to, different pathways to make sure that contract is binding. So, Phil, do you have anything else to add on that?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Nick.
Mm-hmm.
So, any other comments or questions from the steering committee or anyone from the public? Tim, followed by John.
Great, thanks. Really appreciate the presentation. I just wanted to call out one and support when you're talking about the cargo handling equipment, the prioritized funding for port operations. I don't know if that was directly operated by the port or if that was port tenants. But I think that makes a lot of sense because huge region, and if all of the funding is available everywhere, maybe the impact or the positive benefits of that gets a little bit diluted. So definitely in support of limiting or prioritizing funding for the most disadvantaged communities, and in most cases that includes the Portside communities. So support for that.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
John?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I've had a couple of meetings over the last couple of days with residents. And, one of the things that came up in one of the topics was that many of the individuals in the community, are just very much working class, and a lot of the material is at a much higher level, if you will, than what they're accustomed to reading or, quite honestly, comprehending. And one of the things that we were talking about at today's meeting was the fact that, with Sandag and all the other things that are going on with the shipyard, so on and so forth, something that came up that Barrio Logan, for instance, was changing so rapidly that, and then they brought up a note stating that in Barrio Logan, in the area affected, if you will, next to the shipyards and so on and so forth, only 9% were owned by property owners out of all the entire area. And I thought, wow, that's really kind of weird. And they were really concerned about, the prices of rent and whatnot going up. And I bring that up only because, a lot of the different rationale for so many of the people in the community has to do with the economy. And, I'm not sure, if I'm actually covering a valid point, other than to say that many of the community members are just very, very ill prepared for the future. And but I just thought I would bring that up, and let people know that it's a real high concern for so many people. But they're working 2 jobs, taking care of the kids, so on and so forth, and it's just very hard for them to wrap their heads around this whole thing. But I really appreciate the material tonight, and just wanted to say thank you for those who provided it. And good stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Chewy, and maybe I can answer. Josephine has a question in the chat. What is the difference between an MOU and an MOA? Which one has more teeth? An MOU, of course, means a memorandum of understanding, and an MOA is a memorandum of agreement, and they're essentially the same thing. So the same type of agreement, just different words. So one doesn't have more teeth than the other. They're both the same.
And thanks for the question, Josephine. I also want to raise that Margarita added a comment in Spanish that Ana translated. I agree that the new tenants should have electric trucks, and that there are regulations that they comply with.
Thank you for the comment, Margarita.
Nick?
Yeah, one last point, on the PowerPoint section on the infrastructure, one of the strategies is like working with APCD to find funding for infrastructure. If we can make sure that we're prioritizing electrification, there's been a lot of conversation even today about the concerns over hydrogen. So if there's a way that we can prioritize electrification, I think that'd be good. Especially as we're talking about like set asides from APCD funds, making sure that those funds are used for electric trucks and electric charging. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. We'll certainly look into that as we proceed. in these discussions.
Great. Any other final comments or questions from the group? Hearing none or seeing none, want to hand over to Nick and Phil just for some closing comments on this item?
Yeah, just quickly, just wanted to thank everyone for allowing us to be here today. And like I said, we'll probably be coming back to this committee in a little bit, a few months. Not really quite sure the exact time frame, but once we've made a little bit more progress and have a little bit more teeth on kind of the concepts that we're talking about, we'll be certainly revisiting with this group. So Phil, I don't know if you have any closing words as well. But
Just say, yeah, no, thanks everyone. That, you know, this is a lot to take in. This is some early information for you. And as you saw on the timeline, both the Port and APCD intend to go to their separate boards in the month of December to talk more about these, you know, how the MOU negotiations are going and these concepts with them. So there'll be other opportunities for the public and the Port CSC to weigh in. Thanks, everybody.
Phil and Nick. Next slide, please. Great. We have a bit of time left for public comment, so just want to open it up to the full steering committee and members from the public. Anything they want to share with the group about upcoming events or future agenda items they'd like to see. Feel free to raise your hand. Great. It's a little bit, I think we're all a little tired tonight. It's a little bit of a quiet group, but thanks everybody. I've been taking notes, particularly on some items folks had raised earlier. One thing I do want to raise, our next steering committee meeting is scheduled to be in person on November 28th, which is the week after the Thanksgiving holiday. If you absolutely don't think you'll be able to make it, please let us know over email and we can try to restructure or plan for logistics for that meeting so we can have as much participation as possible. Great. Well, with that, I think we can hop off a little early. Thank you everyone so much for your attendance and participation tonight. We'll be sure to send a follow-up email with links to the presentation and contact information to follow up with folks at each of our partner agencies. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night. Buenas noches a todos.
Buenas noches.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night. Buenas noches.